You think you know comfort food? Think again. The recipes Grandma made from memory, without measuring cups, without cookbooks, without hesitation, carried secrets that died when she did. We let entire generations of kitchen wisdom slip through our fingers. Here are 60 recipes only Grandma knew how to make that we foolishly forgot. Native American preparations of stuffed roast duck usually included some common themes like wild rice, corn and beans, acorns, and nuts, but it varied region by region. What really makes this such a standout recipe for dinners is that it is quite literally an entire stuffed duck. This is also something you need such as minimal appliances for making. It can be its own little day, too. So, if you're feeling like calling a friend over and brushing up your cooking skills over the weekend, this might be a good idea. The stuffing is also not something you need to worry about too much because it's not that hard to make. In California and the Southwest, ground acorns and pine nuts had a long tradition of being thickened into stuffing, and this was usually for pies, but the Native Americans thought it was better with ducks. The use of berries and fruits is definitely something I'm not used to, though, and I don't think a lot of people are. Many tribes like the Cherokee and Lenape would use dried cranberries and choke cherries in a fair amount of recipes, but in terms of stuffed duck, it was always used to add a bit of an extra sweetness to it. I think the most difficult part of this might be just managing the bird, because Native Americans would roast the duck whole. This is obviously something we aren't really used to, but if you really want to get authentic with it, you should try cooking it over an open fire. This ensured a lot more even cooking, and the meat would get really tender on the inside, besides just having a slightly smokier flavor. And that's never a bad thing. Carrot ring with cream sauce was a clever way for thrifty home cooks of the 1960s to turn a humble root vegetable into the centerpiece of a family meal. Grated carrots were blended with breadcrumbs, eggs, and a hint of nutmeg before being poured into a decorative bundt mold that gave the dish an almost festive look when unmolded. Once baked until lightly browned, the ring was served with a simple white sauce made from milk and a spoon of flour whisked with butter. This meal brought brightness to the dinner table while keeping costs low because carrots were inexpensive and available year-round. Many mothers appreciated how this dish sneaked extra vegetables into the diets of children who might otherwise turn up their noses at plain carrots. The creamy sauce provided a smooth contrast to the tender crumb of the ring and made it feel more indulgent than its price suggested. Guests at church potlucks and neighbors at block parties often requested the recipe, helping it spread across American suburbs and small towns alike. Creamed chipped salmon on toast was a thrifty mid-century twist on the more familiar chipped beef, made with canned salmon that was both affordable and shelf-stable. Housewives opened a can, stirred the fish into a creamy white sauce made with milk and flour, and poured it over slices of toasted bread. It was quick, filling, and dependable, especially for families trying to stretch budgets while still putting something warm on the table. The mild flavor of salmon worked well with the sauce, turning plain pantry ingredients into a dish that felt hearty and even a little special. Children often ate it without fuss, since the creamy texture made it smooth and comforting. Adults appreciated that it was inexpensive but still felt like a proper dinner. Diners and lunch counters also served versions of it, making it a recognizable comfort food across communities. Creamed chipped salmon on toast stood as proof of the 1950s ability to take canned goods and transform them into meals that could satisfy families at the end of a long day. Peanut butter and pickle sandwiches were the lunchbox legends nobody admits to loving, but many still secretly miss. Born out of the Great Depression, this odd pairing was less about culinary boldness and more about making do with what was left in the pantry. Peanut butter was cheap, packed with protein, and shelf-stable. Pickles added crunch, tang, and just enough bite to wake up plain white bread. Somehow, the combination worked. The sweet creaminess of the peanut butter and the sharp, vinegary snap of a dill or bread and butter pickle created a balance that stayed with you, whether you liked it or not. These sandwiches were slipped into wax paper and handed off like rationed gold. Some kids traded them. Others guarded them with their lives. They were cheap, they were weird, and they were unforgettable. As the decades rolled on and lunch menus got glossier, peanut butter and pickle sandwiches faded from view. It might not win a gourmet prize today, but back then, it was a masterpiece made from struggle and stubbornness. This one might raise some eyebrows today, but back in the day, pork chops with rhubarb compote were about as close to gourmet as summer dinners got. You would sear the chops in a cast iron skillet, brown them up good, and then serve them with a sauce made from stewed rhubarb, vinegar, and a little sugar if you had any to spare. The result? Sweet, tangy, juicy, and warm. Rhubarb was a big deal back then, especially in areas where the plant grew wild or right in someone's backyard. If you had a patch, you had dinner. This recipe showed up in a lot of cookbooks because it was reliable. Even tough cuts of meat got elevated with enough rhubarb sauce on top. It was common to serve it with a scoop of mashed potatoes or white bread to soak up the juices. Not everyone liked the sharp bite of rhubarb, especially kids, but the grown-ups appreciated its practicality. It kept well, cooked fast, and paired perfectly with pork. Some versions added cloves or nutmeg. Others threw in onions or swapped the rhubarb for stewed apples when the season passed. Either way, this dish captured the feeling of summer dinners cooked low and slow with whatever you had on hand. Salsify fritters were the kind of food that sounded fancier than they really were, but boy did they hit the spot. Back in the 1930s and 1940s, families knew how to take whatever was on hand and turn it into something filling and flavorful. Salsify, also called oyster plant, was a root vegetable with a mild taste and a hint of seafood flavor, perfect for families that could not afford shellfish. Peeled and grated, it was mixed with egg, flour, and a pinch of salt, then dropped into hot fat and fried golden brown. The texture was soft in the center and crisp on the edges, and it always paired well with whatever sauce you could scrape together. Some kids thought they were eating crab cakes, others just liked the crunch. Either way, this dish was a weekday miracle and a Sunday treat rolled into one. Today, most folks have never even heard of salsify, let alone tasted it. But ask a senior who grew up in a frugal household, and chances are they will close their eyes and remember that warm plate of fritters their mother served up, hot off the stove, with steam rising and the smell of browned batter in the air. Clay-baked fish is also something that's a bit unconventional because it doesn't really match up with anything we use today. It's a traditional cooking method that was used by several Native American tribes spread across the northern regions. A lot of places in North America were rich sources of fish, like the Great Lakes and the Pacific Northwest. Back then, preserving moisture was its own separate issue and struggle, and this was a particularly widespread way of doing that. This method would help the fish retain most of its moisture while also sealing in all kinds of natural flavors, and the end result was a much more exciting dish. Now, this works with most kinds of fish, so it's not like there's some strict preference. You should just roll with what you like. If you want to be historically accurate, then the Chinook and Haida tribes were pretty fond of using salmon. Some tribes also used trout or catfish, but the idea was to prepare the entire fish while also leaving the scales intact. Why would they do this? It was all to help the fish be baked properly. You didn't want anything messing up the meat on the inside. Now, some tribes were also fond of stuffing their fish, but if that's a little much, you don't have to go the extra mile. Savory oatmeal bake proved that oats could be far more than a breakfast cereal, and that inexpensive pantry staples could hold their own at supper time. Rolled oats were mixed with diced onions, shredded cheese, beaten eggs, and a dash of black pepper, then baked until the top formed a golden crust. The result was a hearty loaf with a texture similar to meatloaf, but without the expense of beef. This dish allowed families to stretch their budgets while still offering a warm and filling dinner that paired well with a simple green salad or sliced tomatoes from the backyard garden. Cooks loved that the recipe welcomed additions like leftover vegetables or small bits of ham, making it an adaptable way to clear the refrigerator. Children often enjoyed the mild, nutty flavor, and leftovers could be sliced and reheated for breakfast the next morning. It embodied the frugal creativity of 1960s kitchens, where a bag of oats and a little cheese could become a main course worth serving to guests without apology. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and tomato sauce were one of the most colorful and practical dinners of the 1950s, turning simple ingredients into a family feast. Green bell peppers were hollowed out, filled with a mixture of rice, ground beef, and onion, and then topped with tangy tomato sauce. Housewives loved this recipe because it was flexible. Leftover rice or vegetables could be worked in to stretch the filling further. Children liked the novelty of eating food served inside a vegetable, while adults appreciated its hearty taste. The peppers baked slowly in the oven, filling kitchens with a savory aroma that promised a warm meal. Many community cookbooks highlighted stuffed peppers as a reliable option for busy weeknights or potluck gatherings. The dish reflected the balance of thrift and presentation that defined mid-century cooking, using inexpensive staples in a way that looked impressive. Stuffed bell peppers became a dinner table favorite because they were nourishing, frugal, and just different enough to feel special without costing much at all. Fluffernutters were the sugar bombs of childhood, smeared between slices of Wonder Bread like sticky little secrets. Made from peanut butter and marshmallow creme, this New England classic was as sweet as the recess bell and just as anticipated. No meat, no veggies, just a sugary swirl that glued your sandwich shut and made your fingers tacky with every bite. The texture was half the fun: soft bread, gooey center, and that unmistakable stretch of marshmallow when you pulled the halves apart. They were a staple of elementary school lunch tables, always wrapped in plastic and slightly flattened from being stuffed into a backpack. Every bite tasted like skipping spelling tests and drawing dinosaurs in the margins of your notebook. The Fluffernutter was not subtle, it was not sophisticated, but it made you feel like you were getting away with something. Over time, it disappeared from school menus and fell out of fashion, replaced by yogurts and wraps and grown-up meals for tiny hands. Ham and banana casserole is one of those recipes that makes you stop and read the page twice. But once upon a time, this odd couple was a regular guest at summer dinners across suburban America. It started with slices of ham wrapped around whole bananas, arranged in a casserole dish and baked with mustard sauce poured over the top. The mustard added a tangy kick, and the bananas softened into the kind of texture that people back then thought of as fancy. Some even added shredded cheddar cheese. It was quirky, no doubt about it. But in the 1950s and 1960s, cookbooks were full of strange pairings that somehow worked. This dish was a crowd pleaser for its novelty as much as its taste. And in hot weather, it was easy to make without much fuss. It showed up at church potlucks, birthday parties, and even weeknight dinners when the fridge was running low. Today, people may cringe at the combo, but for families back then, it was just another way to stretch meat and fruit into a full meal. It is the kind of thing you might laugh at now, but remember fondly if you grew up scraping mustard sauce off your plate. Rolled oats meatloaf was not fancy, but it sure was dependable. When you had ground beef or even just scraps of it, you stretched it the best way you could, and oats were the secret weapon. Breadcrumbs were good, sure, but they cost more and did not keep as long. Oats were cheaper, stored better, and filled you up faster. This meatloaf was mixed with egg, onion, milk, and spices if you had them. The oats soaked it all up and baked into something firm enough to slice and serve cold the next day. You would shape it by hand or press it into a loaf pan, pat the top flat, and bake it until it was browned on the outside and steaming in the middle. A bit of ketchup on top was the cherry on the sundae. It was not the showstopper, but it was always there. This was the kind of meal that anchored you to home, to school nights, to leftovers in a brown bag lunch. These days, folks do not think of oats when they think of meatloaf. But for those who lived through tight years and thrifty kitchens, this was a meal that worked hard and fed well. I think this one might actually work better as a cool history fact, instead of a Saturday dinner you're investing in. But hey, trying new things is cool too. There's definitely nothing as new as a roasted prickly pear cactus for dinner, but to us, it's just an out-of-the-box idea. To them, it was a pretty standard dinner. In arid regions like the Southwest, where cactus growth was always something you would expect, both the pads and the fruit were always eaten. However, cactus on its own isn't exactly the most palatable thing, so roasting it would really help with that. They had a whole specific preparation process for the cactus too. The pads would be harvested when they were young and tender, and before that, they also become very full of fiber. This was good back then because it meant they could be full for a lot longer, and a lot of food and meal plans were designed for sustainability rather than just for the thrill of it. Still, removing the glochids, otherwise known as the spines of the cactus, was as painful as you could imagine. They had tricks for making it quicker, but it was a pain. Native Americans would usually burn off the spines over open flames, or they would scrape them off or cut them with knives. They would also boil them sometimes to loosen the spines. It's definitely one recipe that's really out there, right? Also, interestingly enough, the cacti had a lot of medicinal benefits, like an incredible amount of fiber, a lot of vitamin C, and intense hydration. Stuffed tomato boats floated right into many mid-century cookbooks as a budget-friendly way to transform fresh produce into a satisfying dinner. Large tomatoes were carefully hollowed and filled with a mixture of cooked rice, finely chopped celery, onion, and a light drizzle of mayonnaise dressing for moisture. Sometimes a sprinkle of paprika or a handful of breadcrumbs was added on top for color and texture. This simple combination delivered a surprising amount of flavor and a pleasing balance between the juicy tomato walls and the warm rice filling. Home cooks appreciated how the recipe allowed them to use leftover rice and vegetables, reducing waste while creating something pretty enough for company. In summer months, when gardens overflowed with ripe tomatoes, these stuffed boats provided a refreshing alternative to heavier casseroles. They were served chilled for a cool supper or lightly baked when the weather turned cold, proving their versatility across the seasons. Their bright presentation made them a standout dish for picnics, church potlucks, or a light Friday night family meal. Turkey tetrazzini bake was a perfect solution for leftovers, a creamy casserole that turned Sunday's roast into Monday's dinner. Chunks of turkey were combined with mushrooms, peas, and pasta, all mixed in a white sauce and baked until bubbly. Housewives turned to it after holidays, when leftover turkey needed to be used before it spoiled. Children loved the creamy texture and cheesy topping, which transformed what might have been a tired leftover into something new. The dish also carried a sense of elegance, since tetrazzini recipes had originally been associated with restaurant cooking. By the 1950s, cookbooks adapted it for everyday households, simplifying the method but keeping the comforting taste. It reflected the post-war love of casseroles, which combined thrift with convenience. Families found that turkey tetrazzini could stretch a small amount of meat into a full dinner, feeding many without extra cost. It was hearty, warm, and dependable, the kind of dish that filled bellies while still carrying a touch of mid-century sophistication. The tuna and cream cheese sandwich was what your grandmother made when she wanted to feed you something fancy that was also suspiciously efficient. It was a relic from the 1940s, a time when mayonnaise was not the only binder in town and lemon juice felt like fine dining. Chilled tuna blended with cream cheese, a touch of citrus, and sometimes even crushed pecans or chopped celery. This sandwich wore a pressed napkin and gave off a whiff of Sunday brunch in the cafeteria. Kids either loved it or politely folded it back into the sandwich bag and focused on their chocolate milk instead. The bread was often buttered, soft, and crustless if someone was feeling generous. What made this sandwich stick in the mind was its smoothness, its unexpected tang, and how it seemed to signal that whoever packed your lunch had a plan. This was not a slapdash peanut butter job. This was intentional. Over time, tuna salad took the spotlight and cream cheese retreated to bagels and frosting. But in lunchboxes from another era, it played a surprisingly elegant role. Corn fritter suppers were one of those magical meals that felt light but filled you up fast. Made from fresh corn cut off the cob, mixed with flour, eggs, and a splash of milk, these fritters were dropped into hot oil until golden brown and crisp. You would pile them high on a plate, sometimes dusted with salt or drizzled with syrup if the mood called for it. But the real trick was what came on the side. Thick tomato slices, chilled and sprinkled with pepper, or a scoop of cottage cheese gave the meal its balance. This was not a starter. This was dinner. A hot, crunchy, fresh off the skillet kind of dinner that made the house smell like summer. Cookbooks from the 1940s to the 1970s were packed with corn fritter recipes, each with its own little spin. Some added chives, some tossed in bits of bacon or green pepper. But they all revolved around one thing: making corn, the star. If you had a garden or access to a roadside farm stand, corn fritters were an obvious choice. They were fast, easy, and cheap, and they made everyone at the table feel like they were eating something special. Molasses taffy pulls were more than just candy. They were an event. You would start with a big pot of boiling molasses and sugar, maybe a spoonful of vinegar or butter to smooth it out. It would bubble and steam and fill the whole house with a sticky sweet smell that wrapped around you like a blanket. Once it hit that softball stage, you poured it onto a buttered dish to cool. Then came the fun part. You greased your hands and started pulling, folding, stretching that warm brown ribbon until it turned golden and glossy. Everyone had their own way of doing it. Some twisted it into ropes, some braided it. Some just popped it into their mouths hot. You got sore arms and sticky fingers, but it was worth every pull. It was not just about making candy. It was about making memories. This happened in the kitchen, on porches, or at church socials, and the sound of laughter always came with it. Molasses taffy was a reward after a long day or something to look forward to all week. Now you barely hear about it, but back then, it was as American as apple pie. Venison is one of the most common meats throughout all of history, so it's no surprise that the Native Americans have their own nutty take on it as well. In forests and grasslands, deer would usually thrive a lot more than what we're used to. There used to be, like, massive packs of them roaming around everywhere. Before the 20th century, also, the American chestnut tree was in its golden years. It was devastated later by regional hazards and blight. Chestnuts were something that were available all over eastern woodlands, so it was very easy to forage them and gather them for emergency situations. Venison was always a staple meat for all kinds of tribes, especially the Cherokee, Shawnee, and Algonquians. Deer was something that was respected by tribes for how much the animal would take care of them. It would give them hides for clothing, the sinew was used for tools, and the bones were used in medicinal broths and kept for trading or for hunting tools. The meat was also very flavorful and important for making pemmican, which was a superfood essential to the Native Americans. Hamburger rice skillet pie demonstrated the 1960s knack for stretching a pound of meat to feed a crowd. Ground beef was cooked with onions, peppers, and a generous helping of cooked rice before being spread in a skillet or shallow casserole. A biscuit dough topping, brushed with milk for shine, transformed the humble filling into a pie that looked more luxurious than its ingredients suggested. By combining inexpensive rice with a small amount of meat, families could create a dish that was both hearty and economical, perfect for busy weeknights. The biscuit layer soaked up the savory juices as it baked, giving each slice a comforting blend of flavors and textures. Many homemakers wrote this recipe on index cards to keep near the stove because it could be made entirely from pantry staples. Children enjoyed the fluffy crust and mild seasoning, while parents appreciated how it filled plates without emptying wallets. This skillet pie remained a dependable favorite for decades because it embodied practicality without sacrificing taste or warmth at the dinner table. Meatball and onion gravy skillet was one of the most comforting one-pan meals of the 1950s, made with inexpensive ground beef rolled into meatballs and simmered in brown gravy with onions. Housewives loved it because it required only a handful of ingredients yet tasted filling and satisfying. Served over mashed potatoes or bread, it became a complete dinner that could feed an entire family without stretching the budget too far. Children enjoyed the rich flavor of the gravy, which made even plain mashed potatoes taste special. Adults appreciated the way this dish transformed economical ground beef into something hearty and flavorful. Cookbooks often recommended it as a weeknight staple, since it could be made quickly on the stovetop without heating the oven. The meatball skillet reflected the practicality of mid-century cooking, which emphasized resourceful ways to feed families well. For many, it became a familiar part of the dinner table, a simple but memorable dish that carried both comfort and thrift in every bite. The chow mein sandwich was chaos held together by two buns, and somehow it worked. Born in southeastern Massachusetts, this Frankenstein creation placed a mound of crispy chow mein noodles smothered in thick brown gravy between two hamburger buns. The result was a crunchy, savory, totally illogical meal that became a school lunch staple in some corners of the country. Kids would unwrap their foil-wrapped mystery and find a puddle of sauce and starch that somehow filled every craving and left fingers coated in grease. This was the kind of sandwich you could not eat neatly, and that was half the fun. The noodles poked out the sides, the sauce soaked into the bread, and no two bites were ever the same. The chow mein sandwich was a lunchtime dare wrapped in cultural mashup, a reminder that not all great foods make perfect sense on paper. Over time, regional oddities like this one gave way to standardization. One bite, and you were somewhere between comfort food and total confusion. And somehow that felt exactly right. Baked stuffed zucchini boats were the garden's way of saying dinner was ready. If you had zucchini growing out back, and most families did, you eventually ended up with more than you could use. That is where this recipe came in. You sliced the zucchini, scooped out the center, and stuffed it with breadcrumbs, sausage, herbs, onions, and a little cheese if you had it. Then it went into the oven until golden on top and tender underneath. The result was warm, filling, and surprisingly hearty for a dish with no meat front and center. This was not just about using produce, it was a centerpiece. In the 1960s and 1970s, garden cookbooks practically demanded this dish. It was meat-stretching, kid-pleasing, and oven-friendly. You could eat it warm or cold, toss in a tomato slice or two, and it became a full summer supper. Today it might pass as vegetarian rustic. Back then, it was just smart cooking. Oleomargarine with the coloring capsule was something every child from the 1940s remembers like it was yesterday. It came out of the fridge looking like lard, plain, white, and sad. But then came the fun part. You popped open that tiny capsule of yellow dye, squeezed it onto the oleo, and mashed it in with your hands until the whole block turned the color of sunshine. Kids thought it was magic. Parents thought it was just one more way to make things stretch. Butter was expensive and rationed during the war, and margarine became a staple in almost every home. It cooked like butter, baked like butter, and spread like butter once you got it looking the part. No one wanted white grease on their toast, so the color mattered more than you would think. It became a job for the kids, something to do after school, turning margarine into butter with their little fists and a lot of elbow grease. It stained your fingers and stuck under your nails, but it was a small price to pay to feel like you were helping. It was messy, it was strange, and it is something you do not see anymore. Venison was usually cut into cubes and put into a broth with roasted and peeled chestnuts. They would be fond of using Jerusalem artichokes, squash, and wild onions as well, so stock up on your root vegetables before trying this. Corn husk-wrapped tamales have incredibly deep roots in a lot of Mesoamerican cultures. I know you might not really associate them with a lot of different ethnic groups, but it's genuinely something a lot of them have used throughout their history. There were specific tribes like the Pueblo and Hopi that had very agricultural lifestyles, and the Pueblo even had trade and cultural connections with Mesoamerican civilizations. They would share their knowledge with Mexican cultures, and in return, the Mexicans would share theirs. And that's how Native American tribes first became familiar with the idea of tamales. They were already very used to working with dried corn kernels and grounding them into masa. Also, these are a lot different from the typical tamales you might be used to because they usually rely on bison, venison, and rabbit. And each of those has its unique world of flavor different from the chicken and beef we're so used to on the corners of our streets. If you're looking for a fresh spin, try to hit up an authentic Native American joint or work with some venison or rabbit at home. You might be pretty surprised. Buttermilk potato pancakes were a beloved solution for leftover mashed potatoes and a shining example of kitchen thrift in mid-century America. Cold mashed potatoes were combined with tangy buttermilk, a beaten egg, and a bit of flour to create a batter that fried up into golden cakes with crisp edges and fluffy centers. Served hot from the griddle, these pancakes paired beautifully with applesauce, sour cream, or a simple sprinkle of salt and pepper. The recipe offered a new life to yesterday's potatoes, ensuring that nothing in the kitchen went to waste. Families welcomed the comforting aroma that filled the house as the pancakes cooked, making even an ordinary weeknight feel special. They were hearty enough to stand alone as supper, but also worked well alongside a small slice of ham or a bowl of vegetable soup. Easy to make and quick to cook, These pancakes became a regular part of many 1960s dinner rotations and remain a reminder that frugality can be delicious when handled with care and creativity. Cabbage roll casserole was a staple of frugal cooking, turning ground meat and rice into a filling dinner wrapped in cabbage leaves. Housewives layered seasoned meat and rice inside blanched cabbage, rolled it tightly, and baked the bundles in tomato sauce. The dish was practical because cabbage was inexpensive and abundant, especially from backyard gardens. Children were sometimes hesitant at first, but the rich tomato sauce and savory filling won them over. Adults appreciated the satisfying flavor and the fact that a little meat went a long way when paired with rice and vegetables. It also became popular at community suppers and church potlucks, where its hearty portions made it easy to share. Many cookbooks of the 1950s included cabbage rolls as an example of thrifty yet wholesome cooking. The casserole reflected the post-war trend of stretching ingredients creatively, turning humble produce into a centerpiece meal. Cabbage roll casserole proved that practical cooking could also carry comfort and tradition, nourishing families without unnecessary expense. The lettuce sandwich was what you got when there was nothing else, and yet it became something more. Just 2 slices of bread and a few crisp leaves in between, maybe with a swipe of butter or a dusting of salt if someone was feeling generous. It was minimalist, it was plain, but in a strange way, it was also pure. In the early 20th century, when meat was a luxury and refrigeration was not guaranteed, the lettuce sandwich became a reliable go-to. It was light, refreshing, almost delicate in a time when food was anything but. Packed into school lunches, it was easy to make, hard to mess up, and always surprising in how much it satisfied. Kids might groan, but they still ate it, and maybe even liked it. Over time, it faded into punchlines and parody, replaced by protein-heavy, sauce-drenched monsters that took 3 napkins to conquer. But the lettuce sandwich was never trying to impress. It was just trying to get the job done, and sometimes that was enough. Cold salmon loaf with cucumber sauce looked like something from a buffet table but was made with canned fish and scraps. You flaked the salmon, canned if fresh was too much, then mixed it with breadcrumbs, eggs, lemon juice, and seasoning before shaping it into a loaf and baking. Once cooled, it was sliced and served cold, usually with a cucumber sauce made from sour cream or mayo and finely chopped cucumber. This dish showed up often in the 1950s and 1960s cookbooks, especially in regions where summer meant heat and no one wanted the stove on. Cold dinners were in. Molded ones were even better. You could make it early, chill it, and slice it up at dinner time without breaking a sweat. It was elegant in its own quiet way. Some added celery or pickles, others kept it smooth. Either way, it answered the question of what to eat when the heat made everything else unbearable. Stewed prunes were one of those foods that showed up quietly at breakfast and stayed in your memory forever. They were not glamorous, they were not trendy, but they were warm, sweet, and comforting in a way that stuck with you. Dried prunes would be simmered in water with a spoonful of sugar, maybe a stick of cinnamon or a slice of lemon if your mother was feeling fancy. They would puff up and go glossy, turning soft enough to cut with the side of a spoon. You would spoon them over oatmeal or eat them straight out of a dish, maybe with a splash of cream if you were lucky. They were good for the belly and easy on the budget. Your grandparents swore by them and you probably wrinkled your nose at first until you tasted that syrupy, sticky goodness for yourself. They were breakfast, dessert, or a midnight snack. In those days, food was about what worked, and stewed prunes worked. Today, they are a punchline. But once upon a time, they were just what you needed to start the day right. Hogging an entire hog for yourself was a great hobby for Native Americans. Wild boar roasts were a pretty common activity for Native Americans, but it wasn't something that they came up with. This was actually something they took from the Europeans for once. It was brought over to America by European explorers active during the 16th century. They brought it over in the Southwest, but native species began to spread over to the Southeast after continuous hunting. Tribes like the Creek and Seminole eventually adapted and began to incorporate boris into their diets as well, using their own traditional methods like roasting and pit cooking. The wild boars were really tough to hunt though, but they got pretty good at hunting them down too because of their experience with bows and spears. Some cool military facts. Now, they wouldn't eat the boars as soon as they got them. These were actually mostly preserved for the winter because of the massive amounts of meat they would give. Apple sausage bread. Pudding married sweet and savory flavors in a way that perfectly captured the experimental spirit of the 1960s kitchen. Day-old bread cubes soaked up a custard of milk and eggs before being mixed with diced apples and small bits of sausage for richness. The dish baked until the top turned golden and the apples released their gentle perfume, filling the home with an inviting scent. By using stale bread and modest amounts of meat, thrifty cooks created a dinner that felt both indulgent and practical. The sweetness of the fruit balanced the smoky sausage, while the custard kept every bite moist. Families often served it with a simple green salad for contrast or a drizzle of maple syrup when they wanted extra sweetness. This recipe highlighted the era's willingness to blend unexpected flavors while keeping costs low. Leftovers reheated beautifully for breakfast the next day, making it a true two-meal wonder that reflected the frugal yet inventive cooking style of mid-century American households. Shepherd's pie with canned vegetables was a thrifty adaptation of a classic dish, using pantry staples to create something hearty and filling. Ground beef was cooked with onions, then combined with canned peas, carrots, or corn before being topped with mashed potatoes. Housewives appreciated that it could be assembled quickly with whatever ingredients were on hand. The topping of mashed potatoes turned it into a full meal, stretching a small amount of meat across several servings. Children liked it because the familiar flavors blended together smoothly, making vegetables easier to eat. Adults valued it as a reliable dish that could be made in large batches, perfect for busy households. By the 1950s, shepherd's pie was firmly established as a comfort food in America, and the canned vegetables made it accessible to all families. It reflected the practicality of mid-century cooking, showing how convenience foods could keep traditions alive while still saving money. For many families, shepherd's pie became a dependable weekly dinner. Sloppy Joes were the lunchtime wild card, messy, meaty, and guaranteed to stain your shirt. Every cafeteria had a day when trays were heavy with hamburger buns oozing with ground beef cooked in tomato sauce and mystery spices. It was not elegant, it was not clean, but it was comforting. Sloppy Joes were everything lunch was supposed to be: warm, hearty, and just a little unruly. One bite and half of it landed on your tray. That was the rule. Napkins were never enough. These sandwiches showed up in school lunch lines, birthday parties, and weeknight dinners when parents had 30 minutes and a pound of beef. They were versatile, easy, and crowd-pleasing in the way only something unapologetically simple could be. The sauce was sweet and tangy, the meat hearty, the buns soft and doomed from the first bite. You could smell Sloppy Joe Day before you saw it on your plate. Over the years, they lost their place to healthier, neater options, but no one ever forgot them. Mock chicken legs, better known as city chicken, were a Depression-era idea that stuck around. You took cubes of pork or veal, skewered them, rolled them in flour, egg, and breadcrumbs, then fried or baked them until golden. The idea was to mimic fried chicken legs when chicken cost too much. And you know what? It worked. Cookbooks from the 1940s through the 1970s printed this recipe again and again. In summer, these skewers were served with slaw or cucumbers, something cool to balance the heat. You could reheat them or pack them for a picnic. A pound or two of meat could feed a full family. For families in cities where meat came from the butcher, not a backyard coop, this recipe was gold. It looked like a feast, even if it was scraps. Today, you hardly see city chicken, but people who remember it still say it tasted better than the real thing. Mock chicken salad made with saltines and eggs was a clever fix when the real thing was out of reach. It was something your grandmother made without blinking, throwing together crushed crackers, chopped hard-boiled eggs, mayonnaise, and a dash of mustard if she had it. Sometimes celery, sometimes pickles, but never chicken. That was the whole point. You mashed it until it looked right, scooped it onto sandwich bread or lettuce leaves, and called it lunch. And somehow, It worked. It was creamy, a little tangy, and it felt like something more than it was. Kids ate it at picnics and school lunches. Adults packed it for work. Nobody felt shortchanged. This was during a time when you made do, not complain. When chicken was for Sundays, and this was for everything in between. It did not fool anyone, but it did not have to. It was filling, fast, and got you through the week. These days we look for labels and lean protein. Back then we looked for what would stretch across 3 kids and 2 paychecks. And this dish did it, with grace. Acorn squash was an incredibly popular cultivated vegetable among many different kinds of tribes. Squash in itself is something the Native Americans experimented with a fair amount. All of that effort eventually brought about the Three Sisters agricultural method, which was basically just growing crops of corn, beans, and squash together. The way they grew helped the other plants grow, so they were always grown together because the end result was more fantastic than if they were grown individually. Sweetening squash with maple syrup was also something that was popular among tribes who were centered around maple syrups, and I don't know if you know this, but tapping into maple trees for the syrup was a very common practice of the Native American peoples. They were arguably better at it than anyone else too, especially because of how much they valued maple syrup as a natural sweetener. Some tribes genuinely loved to have it without the syrup, though. They would slice it and dry the squash in the sun for long-term storage. Celery and cheese soufflé brought elegance to an inexpensive vegetable that most people considered only a snack or soup ingredient. Finely chopped celery was sautéed with a bit of butter and folded into a fluffy base of beaten eggs and grated cheese before being baked until the top rose and browned. Despite its sophisticated appearance, the ingredients were simple and affordable, making it a popular choice for dinner parties on a budget. The soufflé delivered a gentle crunch from the celery against the airy texture of the eggs, surprising guests who expected something plain. Because the recipe relied on pantry staples like milk, eggs, and a small amount of cheese, it fit perfectly into the frugal cooking philosophy of the time. Home cooks loved that it felt fancy without requiring costly ingredients or specialized equipment. Served with a crisp salad or a slice of toasted bread, this dish turned an ordinary evening into a special occasion and demonstrated how a humble vegetable could take center stage in a memorable meal. Pork chop with apples and onions was one of the most beloved sweet and savory pairings of the 1950s, frequently appearing in community cookbooks. Housewives pan-fried pork chops until golden, then simmered them with sliced apples and onions for a flavorful contrast. The apples softened into sweetness, while the onions added depth, creating a balanced dish that felt both rustic and refined. Children often enjoyed the sweet notes of the apples, which made the meal more appealing. Adults appreciated its simplicity and the way it elevated an inexpensive cut of pork into something memorable. It became a fall favorite, especially when apples were in season and easy to find. The dish reflected the era's tendency to blend fruit with meats, creating combinations that felt home-style yet slightly special. Pork chop with apples and onions stood out as an example of how American families in the 1950s used seasonal ingredients to create comforting meals that could stretch budgets without sacrificing flavor. Hot browns were not just sandwiches, they were events. Hailing from Louisville, Kentucky, the hot brown was the kind of school lunch you did not expect to see in your lunchbox. But when you did, everything else faded away. It was open-faced, built on toasted bread, and layered with turkey bacon and a thick, rich Mornay sauce that made it feel like something that belonged in a fancy hotel, not the corner of a cafeteria tray. The whole thing was broiled until bubbly, golden, and just messy enough to feel indulgent. It smelled like home. It tasted like someone had really tried. Most kids stared at it, confused. But for those who knew what they were looking at, it was heaven. Each bite was creamy, salty, and warm, something between comfort food and special occasion. You ate it with a fork, or tried to. It was not meant to be neat. It was meant to fill you up and slow you down. Today, you will find them in restaurants, dressed up and modernized. But nothing hits like the homemade version packed with love. Sliced tomato pie with biscuit crust was a midsummer miracle born from the garden and the oven. Tomatoes were the star. Big, juicy ones sliced thick and layered over a buttery biscuit dough pressed into a pie pan. Between the layers went onion, herbs, and sometimes cheddar or dollops of mayo, depending on the cookbook. Once baked, the tomatoes softened and sweetened, and the crust puffed up around the edges. The result was messy, fragrant, and comforting. This pie was not dessert, and it was not just a side, it was dinner. Served warm or room temperature, it filled the house with the smell of summer. Families used it to deal with too many tomatoes and a desire to skip meat. It was practical and indulgent. You could throw in corn or breadcrumbs. Some added a top crust, but most kept it open-faced. It faded when people stopped baking from scratch, but those who remember it will tell you it was magic. Fried cornmeal scrapple was what you made when you had scraps and grit, and a little cornmeal to pull it all together. It started with pork trimmings, whatever you could get, neck, liver, shoulder bits, even bones boiled down for broth. That was mixed with cornmeal and sometimes a little flour until it thickened into a dense loaf. You would chill it overnight, slice it the next day, and fry each slab in bacon grease until the edges crisped up and the inside stayed soft. It was golden, it was greasy, and it stuck to your ribs in the best way. Folks in Pennsylvania Dutch country ate it for breakfast, but plenty of homes across the Midwest and South had their own versions. Some served it with syrup, others with eggs. But everyone had a way. It was a farmer's food, a worker's food, and a child's food, all at once. Today, you barely hear about it unless you live near where it started. But for those who remember, just the smell of cornmeal hitting hot grease can take them back to a cold morning in a warm kitchen. Gooseberry and elk were one of the most prized dishes that Native Americans would make regularly. This was because elk was one of the most treasured animals they had. In the Rocky Mountains, the Pacific Northwest, and the Great Plains, all sorts of tribes were known for how much they prioritized elk usage. This is because elk was something that was beneficial overall, just like deers and bison. The hides wouldn't just be used for clothing. A good quality elk hide, or one that was prized in towns like a white hide, would actually go for a fair amount of resources. They were also something that would provide meat for literally months. Even one elk was a game changer for a tribe going through tough times. They were dried for later use all the time, and the most valuable cuts were always kept for slow roasting so that they could have a great meal out of it. It was preserved for special ceremonies and hunting feasts, which would usually occur during the summer when gooseberries were also in harvest. A roasted elk haunch with some gooseberry sauce was enough food for an entire family or an entire hunting party. So, imagine what it could do for us today. Tomato custard casserole turned two everyday items, canned tomatoes and eggs, into a richly flavored dinner that captured the resourcefulness of the 1960s. The eggs were whisked with milk and a pinch of sugar before being poured over chopped tomatoes and breadcrumbs, then baked until the custard set and the top turned slightly caramelized. This casserole provided protein, vitamins, and comfort all in one dish without requiring expensive meats or elaborate preparation. Many families served it with buttered toast or a simple green salad, letting the natural acidity of the tomatoes balance the creamy custard. The recipe became a reliable weeknight option because it used inexpensive pantry staples that were always on hand. Its smooth texture and gentle sweetness made it appealing to children, while adults appreciated the subtle complexity that developed as the tomatoes baked. This unassuming casserole is a testament to how mid-century cooks could transform basic ingredients into something hearty, nourishing, and surprisingly elegant with little more than patience and a hot oven. Macaroni and tomato hot dish was a simple but hearty baked meal that made regular appearances on 1950s dinner tables. Elbow macaroni was boiled, then combined with canned tomatoes, onions, and cheese before being baked until bubbly. Housewives relied on this dish because it required only inexpensive pantry staples, yet could feed large families. Children enjoyed the cheesy pasta, which was familiar and comforting, while the tang of tomato added a new flavor dimension. Adults appreciated that it was both affordable and filling, especially during busy weeknights. Many church cookbooks featured versions of macaroni hot dish, each family adding its own twist with extra spices or breadcrumbs. It reflected the casserole craze of the mid-century, where simple combinations of starch, sauce, and cheese became beloved staples. Macaroni and tomato hot dish captured the essence of 1950s cooking, economical, convenient, and satisfying without being fussy. For many, it was the definition of everyday comfort food. Peanut butter and honey sandwiches were the gentle cousin of the classic peanut butter and jelly, quieter, softer, and maybe a little sweeter. Instead of fruit preserves, this version replaced the tang with something more mellow, something that stuck to the roof of your mouth and made your fingers smell like golden syrup all afternoon. It was the sandwich you got when the jelly jar was empty, but love was still in stock. A simple swipe of peanut butter on one slice, a drizzle of honey on the other, and two halves pressed together until the honey oozed just enough to make you pause. These sandwiches were often packed quickly, folded into wax paper, and slightly crushed by the weight of textbooks. But that did not matter. If anything, it made them better. There was something old-fashioned about it, something kind. Peanut butter and honey tasted like slow mornings, kind grandparents, and meals that did not need to be fancy to be filling. Today, they are harder to find in school cafeterias and less likely to show up in lunchboxes full of brand-name snacks. The stuffed green peppers with rice and corn were a humble summer dish that did not need anything extra to feel like a full meal. Peppers were halved, seeded, and filled with cooked rice, corn, chopped onions, and sometimes tomato sauce. Everything was spooned in and baked until the peppers softened, then topped with a little cheese if available. It made you feel full without being heavy. In farm communities and suburbs, peppers were easy to grow or buy cheap from roadside stands. That made them a go-to when money was tight, but hunger was not. The corn and rice stretched the filling. You could feed 6 with just a few peppers and a pan of rice. Some added beans or leftover meat, but many made the vegetarian version just fine. It was colorful. It was fragrant. It sat proudly on the table like it had something to prove. And for many summers, it did. Before European contact, a lot of Native American tribes had an incredible amount of access to wild tubers and roots. This was really true for potatoes, which had been domesticated in South America. They began to replace some root vegetables as a staple crop because of the sheer amount of utility. I mean, that's a cultural fact that holds true even now. Who can really deny the worth of a potato? Some days, it feels like it's worth more than all the designers in your wardrobe. Native Americans also had an incredibly interesting way of preparing these potatoes. Frying them in bear fat is definitely something I haven't really thought of before. But then again, these people used to hunt bears semi-regularly, so I think we're on pretty different ends of the spectrum. The potatoes would be sliced and fried in bear fat on a flat stone over an open fire, and it would actually make for some extremely rich and crispy potatoes. Green bean croquettes brought new life to leftover vegetables, turning them into crispy patties that satisfied even the pickiest eaters. Cooked green beans were mashed with breadcrumbs, a beaten egg, and a sprinkle of herbs, then shaped into small rounds and pan-fried until golden on the outside and soft within. This dish allowed thrifty homemakers to stretch a handful of beans into a full meal, pairing perfectly with a dollop of ketchup or a simple white sauce. Children loved the crunch, and parents appreciated the low cost and quick preparation time. Green bean croquettes also demonstrated the growing influence of European cooking techniques in American kitchens, where frying and breadcrumb coatings were becoming increasingly popular. Served alongside a salad or a scoop of mashed potatoes, they brought variety and texture to the dinner table without adding strain to the grocery budget. Their lasting charm lies in the way they prove that even the simplest leftovers can be turned into something special when treated with care and creativity. Creamed chicken over rice was one of the richest but most practical dinners served in the 1950s, making use of milk, flour, and a small portion of chicken. Housewives cooked chicken pieces in a creamy white sauce, stretching a little meat into a dish that could feed many. Served over rice, it became a filling meal that was both comforting and economical. Children enjoyed its smooth, mild flavor, which felt indulgent compared to plainer dishes. Adults appreciated the warmth and heartiness it brought to the dinner table, especially in colder months. diners and cafeterias also served versions of creamed chicken, showing how widespread and beloved it became. It represented the mid-century style of cooking that relied on basic ingredients but transformed them through technique and thrift. Creamed chicken over rice was practical, budget-friendly, and full of nostalgia for families who grew up with its creamy taste and simple presentation on weekday evenings. Bologna and ketchup sandwich was the lunchroom underdog, a squishy, no-frills sandwich that somehow earned its place among childhood favorites. It was cheap, fast, and unapologetically plain. A slice or two of bologna, straight from the fridge, slapped onto soft sandwich bread and dressed with a squirt of ketchup. That was it. No lettuce, no cheese, no frills. But in its simplicity was something oddly satisfying. The bologna was smooth and salty. The ketchup added tang and sweetness. The bread held it all together like a peace treaty between convenience and hunger. It showed up in mid-century lunchboxes packed by parents who needed to stretch a budget and feed a family. Kids would open their bags, see that red smear pressed through the plastic wrap, and know exactly what to expect. There was no surprise, and somehow that was comforting. It was a sandwich that never pretended to be more than it was, and maybe that is why it stuck around as long as it did. You rarely see them now, lost in a sea of organic spreads and artisanal fillings. Pineapple glazed ham steak with minted peas. Sounds fancy now, but it came from kitchens trying to make dinner fast and special. A thick slice of ham, cut from a round or canned variety, was seared in a skillet, then brushed with a glaze of pineapple juice, brown sugar, and mustard. As it sizzled, the glaze caramelized and formed a golden crust. Minted peas were the quick side, just frozen or fresh peas warmed with butter and a few mint leaves. It was fast and used shelf-stable and frozen ingredients, but it looked thoughtful. Cookbooks from the 1950s and 1960s praised it for its balance and bright flavor. The pineapple made it sweet. The mustard gave it a kick. The peas kept it fresh. You could make this in 20 minutes and still feel proud. On a summer night when the house felt too still, something warm and sweet like this hit the spot. Napolles and beans were staple foods for so many indigenous peoples. It's a bit surprising this recipe isn't a bit more well-known. Most of the more popular tribes like the Navajo and the Apache were regular consumers of this. In desert areas, prickly pear cactuses were one of the most valued plants because of their versatility, and a big part of that was the reasons we went over earlier when we talked about roasted cacti. Young cactus pads were usually preferred because they were a lot more rich in water content. The beans were a longer process though, and they're just as annoying today as they used to be back then. You had to really soak them thoroughly overnight. Now, once the nopales were cooked, they would be mixed with beans and simmered for even longer, so that the flavor would genuinely mesh well. Some tribes would add wild onions, mesquite pods, and chili peppers for a more well-rounded flavor profile. It was actually quite an amazing little dish. Cornflake-crusted fish squares were a playful answer to the challenge of making inexpensive whitefish appealing to the whole family. Thin fillets of cod or haddock were cut into squares, dipped in milk and egg, and coated with crushed cornflakes left over from breakfast. Baking or frying turned the cereal coating into a crisp, golden crust that sealed in moisture and added a gentle sweetness. This recipe allowed households to use affordable frozen fish while giving it a texture reminiscent of more expensive fried seafood. Children found the crunchy coating irresistible, and parents enjoyed how quickly the dish came together on busy weeknights. The cornflakes acted as an economical substitute for breadcrumbs and made use of pantry items that might otherwise go stale. Served with a squeeze of lemon or a side of tartar sauce, these fish squares brought a fun and frugal twist to the dinner table, showing the inventive spirit of 1960s cooking where nothing in the kitchen ever went to waste. Stuffed meatloaf with hard-boiled eggs was a showpiece dinner that remained budget-friendly while adding visual appeal. Housewives prepared the meatloaf mixture of ground beef, breadcrumbs, and seasonings, then placed hard-boiled eggs in the center before baking. When sliced, each portion revealed a striking cross-section with egg in the middle, making it both practical and eye-catching. Children enjoyed the surprise of seeing eggs inside their meatloaf, while adults appreciated the creativity of the dish. Despite its flair, it used only inexpensive ingredients, keeping it accessible to families watching their budgets. Community cookbooks often promoted it as a recipe that could impress guests without requiring expensive cuts of meat. It reflected the era's love for presentation, where even everyday meals were arranged to look appealing. Stuffed meatloaf with eggs stood as proof that thrift and creativity could go hand in hand, giving families a dinner centerpiece that felt special without costing much. Cheddar grits casserole brought Southern comfort to weeknight tables while cleverly using scraps to stretch a grocery dollar. Cooked grits were stirred with sharp cheddar cheese, a splash of milk, and any small bits of leftover ham before being baked until the top formed a golden crust. The creamy base and salty accents provided warmth and satisfaction, making it a favorite for cool evenings or family gatherings. Because grits were inexpensive and widely available, this casserole offered a filling main dish that fed many mouths without straining a budget. Home cooks often prepared it in the morning and reheated it for supper, appreciating how well it held its texture. Children loved the mild cheese flavor, while adults enjoyed the hearty, stick-to-your-ribs appeal. Paired with a green salad or simple stewed tomatoes, the dish delivered balanced comfort with little expense or effort. Its staying power in community cookbooks and church potluck menus shows how thrifty Southern traditions easily blended with mid-century convenience to create a meal everyone could enjoy. Scalloped corn casserole was a creamy, comforting side that often doubled as the main dish when money was tight. Housewives mixed canned corn with eggs, milk, and crushed crackers, then baked it until golden and firm. It was inexpensive yet filling, the kind of recipe that stretched basic pantry goods into something that felt hearty. Children loved its pudding-like texture, while adults valued its versatility since it paired well with almost any protein. At church suppers and family gatherings, scalloped corn was a dependable contribution, always disappearing quickly from the table. Cookbooks of the 1950s frequently listed it as a way to transform canned vegetables into something more appealing. The dish reflected the growing reliance on convenience foods while still keeping ties to traditional comfort cooking. Scalloped corn casserole was proof that simple ingredients could yield a dish rich in nostalgia, embodying the resourcefulness and communal spirit that defined mid-century American kitchens. Fried green tomato slices were a thing of beauty before refrigeration made ripened tomatoes a year-round affair. These were the ones picked too early, still firm and sour, and too precious to waste. You sliced them thick, dipped them in buttermilk or egg, dredged them in cornmeal, and dropped them into hot oil until they turned golden and crisp. The outside crunched, the inside stayed tart and tender. It was a snack, a side dish, or a centerpiece depending on what else you had in the kitchen. People in the South knew how to do it best, but folks all over gave it a try when the backyard garden gave up too much too soon. They were best eaten hot, with salt, maybe a little pepper or sauce if you had it. Kids loved the crunch. Adults loved the bite, and nobody complained. These days, they are more likely to show up in a restaurant than in your mother's skillet. But back in the day, fried green tomatoes were a symbol of using what you had, when you had it, and making it taste like a celebration. Manuman pilaf is something that's actually a traditional Native American dish centered entirely around wild rice. I know a lot of us are some genuine fans of rice, so for you guys, this will be a good one. It's something that's great as a summer or early fall dish, and it's also pretty healthy. The nutty and earthy flavor unique to wild rice is what really makes this dish stand out. It gives you a way stronger flavor than brown or white rice. It's also a lot more firm and chewy, which is great for people who don't really like their rice on the mushy side. If you parch it with fire, you can even impart a smoky undertone to it. All you need are some walnuts, maple syrup, and cranberries, and you're good to go. Wild rice is still something you can easily get from any local grocery store. Once you have everything you need, you rinse the wild rice, simmer it until it's tender, drain all the excess water, add any flavorings, and then serve it as warm as you can. This is a dish that's considered sacred in the culture of some tribes, particularly the Anishinaabe culture. It's also a great source of protein if you aren't feeling like meat this week. Mock veal loaf delivered the flavor of expensive cuts without the price, an idea perfectly suited to the frugal 1960s kitchen. Ground pork was blended with breadcrumbs, minced onion, and a touch of milk before being seasoned with a bit of sage and pepper to mimic the gentle taste of veal. The mixture was shaped into a loaf and baked until the top formed a golden crust and the inside stayed moist and tender. A light tomato glaze or brown gravy completed the illusion, giving families a hearty centerpiece that felt far fancier than its ingredients suggested. This recipe became a favorite in community cookbooks and church fundraisers because it fed a crowd with ingredients already on hand. Leftovers made excellent sandwiches the next day, stretching the value even further. By transforming simple pork and pantry staples into something that seemed luxurious, mock veal loaf embodied the clever resourcefulness that defined many mid-century American dinners, proving that satisfying flavor did not require an expensive shopping list or complicated preparation. Chicken salad sandwiches were the quiet heroes of the lunchroom, the kind of sandwich that looked unassuming but delivered comfort in every bite. They started with leftover chicken, chopped fine or shredded, then folded into mayonnaise with bits of celery, sometimes a hint of onion, maybe a touch of mustard or dill. It all depended on who made it. Every family had their version. Some were creamy, some were chunky, some were elegant enough for tea parties and school lunch alike. Slapped between slices of white wheat or a buttered roll, chicken salad was never flashy, but it never disappointed. It felt like home, like Sundays turned into Mondays. It was cold, clean, and quietly satisfying. Kids who got a chicken salad sandwich in their lunchbox were either praised or pitied, depending on who you asked, but they always remembered it. Today, chicken salad has migrated to cafe menus and plastic deli containers, far from its humble homemade origins. Cheese-stuffed eggplant with tomato gravy was how people in the 1960s made vegetarian food feel hearty, long before it was trendy. Eggplants were halved, scooped out, and filled with a mixture of breadcrumbs, grated cheese, chopped eggplant, and herbs. Some folks added onions or olives. Once stuffed, the eggplants were placed in a baking dish and covered with a slow-simmered tomato gravy, thicker than a sauce but smoother than a stew. It bubbled in the oven until the tops were golden and the gravy had soaked into every crevice. You would serve it warm or room temperature with a fork and knife and maybe a slice of buttered toast. This dish showed up in Italian-American households and made its way into countless home cookbooks aimed at budget-conscious cooks. It used up what was in season. It filled bellies. It reheated well. And it felt like something special, even if you made it with grocery store odds and ends. Some versions used Parmesan. Others went big with cheddar. But all of them were built on the idea that dinner did not need meat to be satisfying. It was thrifty, it was rich, and it was worth every bit of oven heat on a summer day. Bread pudding with raisin sauce was the dessert you made when payday was still a week away, and the bread box was more crust than loaf. Nothing got thrown out, especially not bread. You tore up the stale slices, soaked them in a mixture of eggs, milk, and sugar, and baked it until it puffed and browned. That was the pudding part. But what really brought it to life was the sauce. Raisins boiled in water with sugar and a bit of cornstarch to thicken, maybe flavored with a drop of vanilla or a hint of cinnamon. Poured warm over the pudding, it soaked into the crevices like syrup, turning dry scraps into something rich and sticky sweet. This dessert did not come out for birthdays or holidays. It came out on rainy nights and regular Tuesdays, when you needed something warm and soft to make the world feel a little less hard. Grandmothers had a dozen ways to make it, but they all did the same thing, turned scraps into comfort. Today, we reach for boxed mixes and store-bought sweets. But for those who remember it, nothing ever quite beats the smell of raisin sauce bubbling on the stove. Hickory smoked trout is a dish that's both traditional and economical. This recipe was built to both maximize preservation and flavor. The techniques that were developed by the indigenous peoples came in very handy with all sorts of recipes, but the effect was very clear here. Smoking fish was an extremely standard way of reducing spoilage and wastage. Plus, the rich, smoky flavor of hickory already synchronized very well with the technique of smoking fish. That is to say, it all worked together and came together brilliantly. Trout was a very common seafood for people. and depending on the species, you would get an entirely different flavor profile too. Though I always thought that rainbow trout would be better, people were also known to use brook trout for smoking. If you don't have access to either, even freshwater fish is a great alternative. Just make sure to clean and gut whatever you get. Interestingly enough, Native American recipes would not require deboning, but if that's something you want to go ahead with, feel free to do so and recreate this in your own way. What really matters here is whether or not you smoke the trout over a consistently low temperature, because that's kind of the entire key to sealing all those flavors in. The trout is a delicate fish, and the exact kind of flavor and texture the Native Americans would impart to it was something that was only possible thanks to a lot of attention to detail. When you do try to recreate this, make sure you're paying that much attention. Zucchini tomato layer. Bake turned overflowing summer gardens into a warm and colorful family meal that fit any budget. Thin slices of zucchini were alternated with canned tomatoes inside a buttered casserole dish, sprinkled lightly with breadcrumbs and a handful of grated cheese. As it baked, the vegetables released their juices, blending with the cheese to create a savory sauce that required no extra effort. This dish became a staple during peak harvest months, when zucchini was plentiful and nearly free from backyard gardens or neighborhood swaps. Home cooks appreciated how easily it adapted to what they had on hand, allowing the addition of fresh herbs or a scattering of leftover rice to make it more filling. Served hot with crusty bread, it offered a complete vegetarian supper that satisfied even the most dedicated meat eaters. The simple preparation, bright flavors, and low cost made it a dependable recipe that graced countless 1960s dinner tables, celebrating the abundance of late summer produce while keeping grocery bills comfortably low for hard-working families. Sloppy Joe supper became a sensation in the 1950s, combining ground beef with tangy tomato-based sauce and serving it over bread or buns. Housewives loved how quick and inexpensive it was, turning 1 pound of beef into several sandwiches with ease. Children adored the messy, saucy sandwiches, often making them a requested favorite. Adults appreciated the bold flavor, a break from plainer meat dishes of the time. Community cookbooks spread countless versions of Sloppy Joes, from highly spiced to sweet and mild. They were equally at home on weeknight dinner tables and at church gatherings, where large batches could be served with little effort. The dish reflected the mid-century love of casual, hearty meals that balanced thrift with fun. Sloppy Joes were affordable, versatile, and comforting, perfectly suited for a growing suburban culture. Sloppy Joe supper was more than just a sandwich. It became a cultural marker of 1950s kitchens, remembered fondly for its taste and its cheerful messiness. Stuffed tomato platters with egg salad filling were the summer version of keeping it simple without losing the charm. You would start with the ripest tomatoes you could find, usually picked right from the garden or bought cheap from a neighbor's stand. Slice them in half, scoop out a bit of the center, and fill them with homemade egg salad. Not the store-bought kind either. This egg salad was chopped eggs, mustard, a bit of mayonnaise, and maybe a sprinkle of paprika or chopped pickle for punch. Then the filled tomatoes would be plated on a bed of lettuce, often with saltines on the side and a tall glass of iced tea. This was not a lazy meal. It was intentional, refreshing, and bright. The kind of plate that made you feel taken care of even when money was tight and the kitchen was sweltering. These showed up at bridge club meetings, baby showers, and Sunday dinners when nobody felt like cooking. The tomatoes cooled the egg salad. The lettuce gave it a little crunch. And if you were lucky, someone would have tossed in some sweet relish just right. The whole thing was cold, clean, and deeply satisfying. A real taste of summer simplicity. Baked custard with nutmeg was a quiet dessert, the kind that did not show off but always delivered. It started with milk, eggs, and sugar, whisked together and poured into small ceramic dishes. A little nutmeg on top, always fresh if your grandmother had her way. Then into the oven, slow and steady until it set just right. The top would be golden. The middle just barely jiggled. And the smell, warm milk and spice, was enough to calm the whole house. People served it warm or cold, sometimes with fruit, sometimes with nothing at all. It was simple, cheap, and incredibly comforting. It was also the kind of dish that showed up when the milk was about to turn and the eggs were too few for a cake. Nothing wasted, everything used. Children loved it. Old folks swore by it. And it felt fancy, even when it was born out of thrift. These days, you will find fancier puddings in store aisles, but none of them carry the quiet pride of a homemade baked custard set out on a Sunday night. If you really want to do something for a big flat-out feast, though, there's just nothing better than some Native American-style spit-roasted turkey. Turkey was a major source of protein and food for indigenous peoples in the eastern woodlands. They had been used to preparing and handling turkey for generations. They even had the cleaning process down to a science. Also, the feathers of the bird were used for clothing, for arrows, so that they would fly faster, and for rituals. I think they had some pretty good Thanksgiving ideas a long while before it even became a thing. If you wanted to recreate this today, you should ideally use a wild turkey, but even a domestic one works well. Also, smoked paprika and wild onions, plus the sage and thyme. I also suggest keeping it authentic and going with some bear fat or walnut oil if you can. You would need to set up a rotisserie spit over an open fire if you can. The end result is this deeply flavorful turkey that's got this wonderfully crispy exterior on the outside, but a smoky taste and tender feel on the inside. It's really just a delight for any kind of big gathering or party, and it's not a dish you want to be missing out on. Pea and egg salad plate was a thrifty supper that turned humble staples into a refreshing main dish for a warm evening. Canned peas were drained and chilled before being folded with chopped hard-boiled eggs, diced celery, and a splash of mild vinegar dressing. A pinch of dry mustard or a spoon of mayonnaise added just enough richness to bind everything together while still keeping the cost low. Served on crisp lettuce leaves or alongside sliced tomatoes from the backyard garden, it provided protein and texture without any need for meat. Home cooks loved how quickly it came together using pantry items that were inexpensive and easy to find year-round. Children enjoyed the gentle sweetness of the peas, while adults appreciated the subtle tang from the dressing. This simple combination was light enough for summertime, but filling enough to carry a family through a busy evening, reflecting the practical yet creative spirit of mid-century kitchens, where canned vegetables and eggs formed the backbone of many dependable weeknight meals. Beef and cabbage hot dish was the kind of recipe that felt both hearty and thrifty, the very definition of mid-century practicality. Housewives browned ground beef with onions, layered it with chopped cabbage, and baked it all together in a simple tomato base. The result was a filling casserole that stretched a pound of meat into enough servings to feed a hungry family. Children often wrinkled their noses at the sight of cabbage, but once it baked down with the beef and sauce, it became sweet and tender, blending smoothly with the other flavors. Adults appreciated how nourishing it was, providing both protein and vegetables in one easy pan. Church cookbooks of the 1950s often featured variations of this dish, reflecting its popularity across communities. It was affordable, convenient, and required only pantry staples, making it a dependable weeknight choice. Beef and cabbage hot dish was not glamorous, but it embodied the resourcefulness of the decade, keeping families satisfied on limited budgets while still delivering the warmth of a home-cooked meal. Egg salad sandwiches were messy, mushy, and magical in the way only school lunch legends can be. Made from chopped hard-boiled eggs, mayonnaise, and a touch of mustard or seasoning, egg salad was the sandwich that smelled strong and stuck with you, literally and figuratively. It was packed between slices of soft bread and often left a faint imprint on the bag it came in. And yet, it was beloved. There was something comforting about it, something that felt homemade and humble. It was a meal you could trust. Some versions had bits of celery or onion, others kept it basic. But every egg salad sandwich came with a promise. You were going to be full, and you were going to remember it. Kids either cherished it or turned up their noses. There was no in-between. But for those who loved it, egg salad was the crown jewel of the lunchbox. Today, it is often replaced by cleaner, quieter options, tucked away in prepackaged containers at the back of the deli case. Cold macaroni ring with tuna and peas was one of those make-ahead meals that looked like a party but tasted like pantry staples. It started with elbow macaroni, cooked and cooled, then tossed with mayonnaise, canned tuna, peas, chopped celery, and a touch of lemon juice. The whole mixture was packed into a ring mold and chilled for hours until it held its shape. Come dinner time, you flipped it out onto a plate and maybe garnished it with parsley or extra peas. This was dinner, not a side dish, and certainly not just for potlucks. It showed up in homemaker cookbooks throughout the 1950s and 1960s as a cool supper for hot days when no one wanted to turn on the stove. The peas gave it color. The tuna gave it protein. The macaroni made it stick to your ribs. You would slice it like a cake and serve it with iced tea and saltines. It was pretty in its own quiet way, and somehow it always worked. Some people added pimentos or chopped olives for flair. Others kept it plain and reliable. It is easy to laugh at a tuna ring now, but back then it was a little miracle of convenience and charm. Creamed spinach on toast was a lesson in how to turn almost nothing into something you could be proud of. Spinach, either canned or fresh if you were lucky, would be simmered down in a white sauce made from flour, butter, and milk. You would stir it until it thickened into something smooth and velvety, then spoon it over a slice of toasted bread. That was it. No meat, no sides, no fluff. But it filled the belly and warmed the bones, and that was what counted. You would cut it with a knife and fork like a fancy open-faced sandwich and pretend it was more than it was. And honestly, it tasted better than you might think. The richness of the sauce, the slight bitterness of the greens, the crunch of the toast underneath, it all came together. This was the kind of recipe people learned out of necessity but grew to love. Kids ate it without complaint. Adults swore by it. And if you were sick or tired or short on groceries, it was there waiting. You do not see it much anymore, but ask anyone who grew up in the 1940s, and they will nod with a smile. Beaver tail soup was also a very prized dish, and beavers were actually a favorite among Native Americans. I don't know how you feel about them, but personally, I think the little runts are really entertaining. What I did not know is that they are actually also really good for energy because they're so full of fat. Lots of tribes like the Iroquois and Blackfoot would prepare beaver tail soup specifically as a winter-only dish because of how well it would sustain most of the tribes. A single serving of soup could fill a person up with enough energy to last through a tough winter day, and it could be preserved for later. Mixing in different kinds of foraged materials and ingredients would only bulk the soup up a lot more and do wonders for its nutritional content. Herbs like juniper and sage were amazing final touches, and the end product was something that really revitalized a person. Though the preparation process is definitely something to keep in mind. I'm also not entirely sure where you could get beaver tail from. Raisin rice. Pilaf proved that a meatless dinner could still feel special and satisfying when handled with care. White rice was simmered slowly with a bit of butter until each grain was tender, then tossed with plump raisins that had been soaked in warm water to bring out their natural sweetness. A pinch of cinnamon or nutmeg added gentle spice, turning plain rice into a fragrant dish that filled the kitchen with an inviting aroma. Many 1960s households served this pilaf as a main course on nights when meat was too expensive, or saved it for church suppers where a simple vegetarian option was welcome. It paired beautifully with a crisp green salad or a side of baked apples, creating a balanced meal from inexpensive ingredients. Leftovers reheated well for breakfast with a drizzle of honey or a splash of milk. The dish showed how a few pantry staples could stretch a grocery budget and proved that even the simplest ingredients could deliver comfort and a hint of elegance at the dinner table. Oven-baked cod with Ritz cracker topping was a beloved fish dinner that felt indulgent without straining wallets. Fresh cod was placed in a baking dish, topped with crushed Ritz crackers mixed with butter and baked until golden and crisp. Housewives turned to this recipe when they wanted to serve seafood that looked elegant but required little effort. Children loved the crunchy topping, which masked the mild taste of the fish and made it more appealing. Adults appreciated the balance of thrift and presentation, since cod was affordable compared to other fish and crackers were always on hand. community suppers often showcased this dish because it was easy to prepare in large batches while still impressing guests. It carried the comfort of baked casseroles while also hinting at sophistication, especially for families far from the coast who still wanted seafood on the table. Oven-baked cod with Ritz cracker topping stood as a perfect example of 1950s creativity, elevating basic ingredients into something memorable and satisfying. Ham salad sandwiches were what you made when dinner became tomorrow's lunch, and nothing went to waste. Chopped leftover ham mixed with mayonnaise, a spoonful of relish, and maybe a dash of mustard turned into something far greater than the sum of its parts. The result was creamy, salty, tangy, and just textured enough to let you know this was not store-bought. It sat heavy on white bread and came wrapped in wax paper or pressed gently into a sandwich bag that stuck to the crust by lunch hour. Kids either loved ham salad or politely declined the swap. It had presence. A slightly chunky spread with pink edges and flecks of green. Grandparents swore by it. Cafeterias served it weekly, and for a long time, it was a way to turn leftovers into something that felt brand new. It was a lunchbox classic for those raised with one hand on the cutting board and the other on the budget. Today, it rarely shows up in modern school lunches, replaced by prepackaged options and flashier flavors. Canned peach and cottage cheese ring mold was the cold supper your grandmother swore by, and for good reason. Molded in a ring pan, it started with plain gelatin, mixed with the syrup from canned peaches, folded together with cottage cheese, diced peaches, and sometimes crushed pineapple or chopped nuts. Once set, it came out as a shimmering circle of pastel fruit and cream, served cold with a dinner roll or a spoonful of mayonnaise on the side. That might sound strange now, but this was a meal built for heat. It did not require an oven. It could be made the night before, and it was filling in that oddly satisfying way that old-fashioned suppers tend to be. This recipe showed up constantly in homemaker magazines and fundraising cookbooks during the 1950s through the 1970s. It was meant to be practical and pretty. You could make it with what you had in your pantry, and it made use of canned goods in a way that felt fresh. People served it at luncheons, baby showers, or just on nights when nobody wanted to cook. It was elegant on a dime, a little weird by today's standards, and a real piece of summer dinner history. Canned Vienna sausages with crackers were never meant to impress. They were meant to fill a lunchbox and keep you going. Little pink tubes packed in brine, soft and salty straight from the can. You would peel back the metal lid and dump them onto a plate, maybe rinse off the jelly if you were feeling fancy. Then came the saltines. No mustard, no fuss, just protein and crunch, and maybe a sip of milk to wash it down. In the 1940s, this was standard fare for school lunches, factory break rooms, and quick bites at the kitchen table. It was cheap, packed well, and lasted forever on the pantry shelf. Kids would trade them. Grown-ups would stash them in glove compartments or tackle boxes. They were a little strange, sure, but they got the job done. You do not see them around much anymore unless you are walking down the discount aisle or packing for a camping trip. But for a whole generation, Vienna sausages were more than just canned meat. They were part of growing up. And somehow, biting into one today still brings back the sound of screen doors and the rustle of wax paper. Buffalo and hominy soup is a bit of a unique one. I know that hominy is still something a lot of people prefer, definitely some UNCs and boomers, but also some people who just like retro, vintage, or cultural food. Buffalo meat is a bit harder to get than wild rice though, and depending on where you live, this might not be a dish you're able to recreate, but I digress. You brown the buffalo meat in a pretty large pot, simmer the broth, add the hominy and seasonings, and just stir. Then you taste, test, and serve. It's a pretty easy recipe considering that the rest of the stuff on here does take some technical cooking skill, especially when it comes to the prep work. If you do decide to recreate this, you should honestly aim for making a winter dish out of it. That's how it was historically eaten back in the day for the Native American peoples as well, and that's because bison meat was really good at keeping you warm. Plus, this is just one of those soups that brings life back into you. Bologna and apple skillet combine two humble ingredients in a sweet and savory partnership that captured the playful side of 1960s home cooking. Slices of bologna were quickly browned in a cast iron skillet, then tossed with diced apples and a small knob of butter until the fruit softened and released its natural juices. The salty meat and gently sweet apples created a flavor that felt surprisingly rich despite the low cost. This dish made excellent use of ingredients that were almost always on hand: inexpensive deli meat and seasonal fruit. Families appreciated its speed on busy weeknights, while children were drawn to the fun contrast of tastes and textures. Served over toast or alongside mashed potatoes, it became a complete meal that proved resourceful cooks could create memorable flavors from the simplest pantry staples. Decades later, it remains a reminder of how imaginative combinations could turn everyday items into an unexpected treat without straining a modest household budget or requiring elaborate preparation. Hot dog casserole with noodles was one of those simple 1950s creations that turned an inexpensive ingredient into a family favorite. Housewives sliced hot dogs into coins, stirred them into a creamy noodle mixture, and baked everything together until bubbling. It was an economical way to stretch a package of hot dogs into a full dinner, feeding several mouths with minimal cost. Children were delighted by the playful mix of pasta and sausage, while adults found it practical for busy evenings. It reflected the mid-century fascination with casseroles, where anything could be combined in one dish to save time and money. Many community cookbooks featured versions of hot dog casseroles, each household adding their own twist with cheese, peas, or breadcrumbs. The dish carried a sense of fun while also being grounded in thrift, making it one of the more memorable examples of resourceful cooking. Hot dog casserole with noodles captured the spirit of the 1950s kitchen: creative, frugal, and unashamedly comforting. Pimento cheese sandwiches were a Southern love letter written in cheddar, mayonnaise, and bright red pimentos, served between soft white bread and packed with personality. This was not just a sandwich. It was a tradition, a ritual, and sometimes a dare for kids unfamiliar with its bold, tangy flavor. The cheese was sharp. The mayonnaise mellowed it out. The pimentos? They brought color, a hint of sweetness, and that unmistakable peppery kick. Pimento cheese was often whipped into a spread and slapped onto sandwich bread before being wrapped in wax paper and tossed into a lunchbox. It squished a little, stained the paper orange, and always felt like it had something to prove. Some kids swapped them, others hid them, but everyone remembered them. It was not the kind of sandwich that blended in, and that was the point. Over the years, it slipped out of school cafeterias and into specialty food menus, but back then, it was a staple that defined a region and a generation. It was homemade, it was messy, and it was honest. Bologna salad sandwich plates were the quiet champions of summer dinners when the fridge was nearly empty, but you still needed something that felt like a meal. You would take bologna, thick cut or leftover slices, run it through a grinder or chop it by hand, then mix it with mayonnaise, sweet relish, and maybe some mustard if you liked a little zip. The resulting spread was scooped onto a leaf of butter lettuce, arranged on a plate with a couple of pickles, and served cold with slices of white bread or a few crackers on the side. This was not the same as a bologna sandwich you slapped together in a hurry. This was the dressed-up version, the dinner version. And for a lot of families in the 1950s and 1960s, it was enough to make the evening feel just a little more put together. Iced coffee or sweet tea on the side made it feel like a full meal. It might sound modest now, but it filled bellies and made do with what was on hand. People were proud of their spreads. Some added chopped celery. Others blended in boiled eggs or diced pickles. Every house had its twist. Pickled pig's feet were not for the faint of heart, but back then they were a treat. Jarred in vinegar, salt, and spices, they sat behind counters at general stores or in the back of your grandmother's fridge. Pink, rubbery, and packed with flavor, they were chewed down to the bone with a kind of reverence. You would fish one out with a fork, shake off the brine, and dig in. Cold, chewy, and full of tang. It was not just food, it was an experience. Some folks ate them as a snack. Others called it a meal. There was collagen in the skin, meat near the joints, and enough salty kick to keep you coming back. They were popular in the South, but you would find them everywhere from Pennsylvania Dutch farms to urban corner stores. Kids might make a face, but grown-ups knew the value of a food that used every part of the animal. Nowadays, you have to look hard to find them, and most people will pass them by without a second glance. But back then, pickled pig's feet were something you looked forward to. Strange, sure, but unforgettable. Chili-spiced pumpkin mash is a dish that does wonders with some flavors you would have never imagined working together. The sweetness of pumpkin is something we normally would never associate with the intense tang of chili spices, but hey, this savory and sweet mash is here to break stereotypes and expand horizons. Pumpkin was a major crop for indigenous peoples across all kinds of regions in America, both the northern and southern parts. It was something people loved for the immense amount of nutrition it had. Indigenous peoples of the Northeast and Great Lakes regions would grow several different versions of squash, and some of these would include pumpkins. It was definitely a very fall-only item, and to be honest, it went along with the autumn vibes very well. People loved the contrast of this dish. The natural sweetness of the pumpkin balanced out very well from the heat of the chili peppers, and it made a very comforting dish. The texture of the mashed pumpkin was something that contrasted with the smoky notes of the chili, and that led to it becoming a very well-rounded flavor profile. It was like a party in your mouth. Vegetable curry stew introduced a mild touch of international flavor to American kitchens, while staying firmly in the realm of affordable comfort food. Potatoes, carrots, onions, and canned chickpeas simmered slowly with a gentle dusting of curry powder, filling the house with a warm, spiced aroma that felt both new and familiar. The recipe was flexible enough to accept any vegetables on hand, making it ideal for gardeners or thrifty shoppers. During the 1960s, when interest in global flavors was growing, this stew offered a budget-friendly way to explore something different without leaving the home kitchen. Served with plain rice or a slice of crusty bread, it delivered a complete protein and plenty of satisfying texture. Families discovered that the spices brightened otherwise simple ingredients, proving that excitement at the dinner table did not require expensive meats or specialty imports. Vegetable curry stew stands as a delicious example of how mid-century cooks embraced fresh ideas while still practicing the frugality and adaptability that defined their daily meals. Baked ham with mustard brown sugar glaze was the centerpiece of countless 1950s holiday tables, serving as both a celebratory dinner and a source of days' worth of leftovers. Housewives coated the ham in a glaze made from mustard and brown sugar, baking it until the surface caramelized into a sweet, tangy crust. The aroma alone filled homes with anticipation. Children loved the sugary glaze, while adults appreciated how the ham could be sliced thin for sandwiches or diced into casseroles after the feast. It was practical luxury, a dish that felt festive without being wasteful. Many families associated it with Christmas, Easter, or Sunday gatherings when extended relatives came together around the table. Cookbooks and advertisements often promoted glazed ham as a symbol of prosperity in the post-war years. Baked ham with mustard brown sugar glaze became an enduring tradition of the 1950s, embodying both the celebratory spirit of the era and the resourceful mindset that ensured nothing went to waste. Deviled ham sandwiches were not for the faint of heart. They came with a kick and a scent that announced their presence the moment you unwrapped the wax paper. Ground ham mixed with spicy mustard, paprika, and seasonings that somehow always felt a bit mischievous, packed between slices of white or rye bread. It was meat with an attitude, the kind of sandwich that either made your eyes light up or your nose crinkle in confusion. Popularized by the Little Underwood cans, deviled ham was both a pantry staple and a school lunch wild card. It had bite, it had heat, and it came with just enough mystery to make you wonder what exactly deviled meant. These sandwiches were strong in taste, smell, and opinion. Some kids loved them, others traded them instantly for chips or chocolate milk, but they always left an impression. Today, they are rarely seen, buried beneath layers of more polite sandwich options. But deviled ham was once a schoolyard standout, strange, spicy, and unforgettable. Ham and noodle ring with creamed corn center sounds like something out of a school cafeteria, but it was once the crown jewel of many a 1960s dinner table. You would mix up a batter of cooked egg noodles, chopped ham, eggs, cheese, and a bit of milk, then press it all into a ring mold and bake until set. The middle was left empty until serving time, when you would ladle in creamed corn, warm, buttery, and just thick enough to hold its shape. This was a one-dish dinner meant to serve a crowd with the illusion of elegance. Kids loved the noodle ring part, while the adults appreciated how cheap it was to make. Cookbook after cookbook recommended it for Sunday suppers or ladies' luncheons. It looked fancy, but it was made from pantry basics. You could dress it up with paprika or parsley. You could swap the corn for peas if that was all you had. But no matter how you spun it, this was comfort food in a circle. A little weird, a little showy, and very much a product of its time. Still, on a hot night when you needed a filling meal fast, it did the job well. Creamed celery casserole was not anyone's favorite dish, but it showed up like clockwork at every Sunday dinner and holiday table. Celery was cheap, lasted long, and added crunch to just about anything. But this dish was all about soft. You chopped the stalks, blanched them down, and smothered them in a thick white sauce made of milk, butter, and flour. Sometimes there were onions, sometimes breadcrumbs baked on top until golden. You served it steaming in a big dish, right alongside ham or roast beef or whatever else you managed to scrape together. It was not flashy, but it filled the plate and gave everyone something mild and creamy to balance the rest. It was the kind of thing you could always make no matter what was going on in the world. Celery was one of those vegetables that just kept showing up, and people found ways to love it. This casserole was one of them. Today, it is mostly forgotten, pushed aside for flashier, more flavorful sides. But ask anyone over 70 and they will tell you they had creamed celery more times than they could count. This is a recipe that's perfect for all the different kinds of vegetarian fans out there. If corn and tomatoes sound like your cup of tea, then sun-dried tomato and corn pudding is something that's going to rock your entire world. Native Americans had a fun little way of making this recipe too. Indigenous peoples would grind corn using all kinds of different tools, such as a handheld grinding tool or a stone mortar and pestle. This was all done so that it would achieve an incredibly coarse texture in the end, and then herbs were added. The herbs were pretty much the usual ones you've seen, but any peppers from trading were also commonly added onto this. As far as typical Native American flavors go, this is definitely a little bit unconventional. The pudding was also something that was a unique texture. It was also something that was cooked on a cast iron skillet more than it was made over an open fire. The slow cooking was really essential for people because the flavors would seal themselves in completely, giving you the savoriness and tang of the sun-dried tomatoes with the creamy texture and sweetness of corn. Corn and cottage cheese pie turned two budget staples into a surprisingly elegant dinner dish that impressed guests as well as family. Sweet corn kernels, either fresh or canned, were combined with creamy cottage cheese, beaten eggs, and a touch of flour to create a smooth filling that set beautifully inside a simple pastry shell. Baking brought out a gentle sweetness that paired perfectly with the tang of the cheese, making each slice rich yet light. This pie was easy to prepare ahead of time and served equally well warm or at room temperature, an advantage for busy hosts or church suppers. The ingredients were inexpensive and widely available, making it an accessible option for families looking to stretch their food dollars without sacrificing flavor. Leftovers held up well and could be enjoyed for breakfast or lunch the next day. Its enduring charm lies in how it transforms humble pantry items into something that feels like a special occasion, capturing the inventive spirit of 1960s American home cooking. Ground beef. Spanish rice was a mid-century favorite that showed how much Americans were fascinated by what they considered exotic flavors. Ground beef was cooked with onions, garlic, canned tomatoes, and rice, seasoned with chili powder or paprika for a mild heat. It was simple to prepare, yet carried a flavor profile different from the standard meat and potato dinners of the time. Children found it tasty and filling, while adults enjoyed the novelty of something that seemed worldly without being complicated. Housewives appreciated how a small amount of beef could be stretched with rice to create several servings, making it both thrifty and practical. Many 1950s community cookbooks featured Spanish rice as a staple recipe, reflecting its popularity across the country. It reflected both curiosity and restraint, delivering just enough spice to feel adventurous while still keeping the dish approachable for every family member. Ground beef Spanish rice captured the way mid-century America experimented with new tastes while holding firmly to the values of thrift and convenience. The cheese and pickle sandwich was for the kids who liked things sharp and sour, a little strange, and completely satisfying. A thick slice of cheddar, sometimes aged, layered with sweet pickles or tangy dill slices pressed between slices of sandwich bread, often white, occasionally wheat. It was a flavor bomb. Salty cheese met vinegary crunch, and somehow the combination made more sense than you would think. This was not a loud sandwich. It did not leak or crumble or stain your lunch bag. It sat there quietly, confident in its simplicity. You either craved it or could not stand it. But for those who loved it, it was perfect. It was the kind of sandwich you could eat cold, no heating or fuss required. It stayed intact. It delivered every time. Over the years, cheese and pickle became more of a British delicacy than an American staple. But there was a time when this sandwich showed up in lunchboxes across the country. Today, it is rarely seen in school cafeterias. Sliced cold meatloaf with celery relish was the kind of meal that quietly held families together through long, hot summers and tight grocery budgets. After meatloaf night, what came next was almost better. Thin slices of the chilled loaf served on a plate with a scoop of tangy celery relish on the side. That relish was simple: chopped celery, onion, a dash of vinegar, maybe a pinch of sugar if you wanted to get fancy. The contrast between the dense, savory meat and the bright crunch of the relish made this leftover dinner feel like its own occasion. White bread or saltines were standard sides and no one complained. This showed up in a lot of mid-century cookbooks as a suggestion for next-day meals. It was easy. It was cheap. It felt satisfying without being heavy. And in houses where meat was stretched thin, turning leftovers into something new was a skill people were proud of. Some folks made their meatloaf with oats or breadcrumbs to stretch it. Others added bell peppers or hard-boiled eggs in the center. No matter the version, this cold plate dinner was a reliable summer staple that tasted better the second day. Potato pancakes with applesauce were what happened when last night's mash met this morning's frying pan. You took those cold leftover potatoes, mixed in a little flour, maybe an egg, and shaped them into rough little patties. Then came the skillet, hot with grease, and the sizzle that meant breakfast was just minutes away. Crispy on the outside, soft and creamy inside. These were comfort food without needing anything fancy. But the trick was always in the applesauce. Cold, sweet, and spooned on top, it turned those humble cakes into something a little special. The contrast made it work. Fried and fresh, savory and sweet. German and American roots both played into the recipe, and it showed up all over, from coal towns in Pennsylvania to farm kitchens in Iowa. It was filling, fast, and cheap. Families would eat it for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and nobody got tired of it. Today, we rush to cafes and order it as a novelty. But back then, it was as regular as a cup of coffee, and just as welcome. When you hear about sweet potatoes, your mind immediately goes to them. They're just that good. When you hear about ash-baked sweet potatoes, your mind immediately raises several question marks, because why is there ash on my food? Yet this was a common practice done by Native American peoples back in the day. It was very regular for sweet potatoes to be placed directly in the embers of an open fire or to be layered with hot ash to protect them from the flame. Otherwise, you would risk burning those potatoes. And wastage was a very different concept back then to what it is now. Nowadays, a little kitchen-related oopsie-daisy isn't anything to worry about. It happens, we just hold space for it. Back then, it was actually a deal, like you really didn't want to be wasting food like that. Depending on the size of the sweet potatoes, they would usually bake for an hour or 45 minutes, and the heat from the embers and ash would help to soften the potatoes. The best part was that they would also get a ridiculously nice smoky texture and flavor from it too. Sweet potatoes were something the Cherokee and Creek tribes got really good at, and it was for this exact recipe. Hominy and bacon casserole offered hearty satisfaction with minimal ingredients, highlighting how resourcefulness defined many mid-century meals. Creamy canned hominy provided a naturally sweet base that absorbed the smoky flavor of crisp bacon bits sprinkled throughout. A light sauce of milk and butter bound everything together before baking, creating a dish with comforting richness despite its simplicity. Families often served it as a main course with a side of green vegetables or a slice of cornbread, making it a complete and inexpensive dinner. Hominy's long shelf life and low price made it a dependable pantry staple, while just a few strips of bacon added enough depth to please meat lovers without straining the budget. The casserole reheated beautifully, so leftovers were welcomed for quick lunches the next day. Its combination of smooth texture and smoky taste made it popular at potlucks and church gatherings where thrifty recipes were always appreciated. Hominy and bacon casserole remains a testament to how modest ingredients can deliver true comfort and memorable flavor when prepared with care and creativity. Cabbage and noodle skillet, often called haluski style, was a dish that showed the strong influence of immigrant traditions on mid-century American cooking. Housewives fried chopped cabbage in butter until tender and slightly sweet, then tossed it with noodles and onions. It was incredibly simple yet surprisingly hearty, providing comfort with only a few inexpensive ingredients. Children enjoyed the mild taste, while adults appreciated how filling and affordable it was. The dish often appeared at church suppers in areas with large Eastern European communities, eventually spreading into broader American cooking. It represented the way immigrant recipes blended seamlessly into mid-century kitchens, becoming everyday staples. Housewives leaned on it when money was scarce, since cabbage and noodles could be bought cheaply and stretched across several meals. Cabbage and noodle skillet was proof that even the humblest foods could carry warmth, tradition, and satisfaction, making it a quiet but memorable part of 1950s dinner tables. The peanut butter and banana sandwich was sticky, sweet, and oddly sacred, especially if you grew up with a radio playing Elvis in the background. Soft white bread cradled ripe banana slices layered atop thick peanut butter, creating a sandwich that was pure indulgence and pure nostalgia all at once. It was comfort food at its simplest. No baking, no slicing, just a knife, a spoon, and one slightly bruised banana. Kids loved it. Parents trusted it. Lunchboxes welcomed it. Every bite was creamy, soft, and just a little bit messy. Sometimes it got mashed during the morning bus ride, but that only made it better, denser, more unified, like the ingredients had been given time to fall in love. Elvis Presley may have added bacon to his, but most kids were happy with just the basics. Over the years, the peanut butter and banana sandwich faded from lunch menus, traded out for wraps and granola bars. But it never really disappeared. Garden vegetable casserole with saltines was not just a way to use up the harvest, it was practically a tradition by the end of July. People who grew their own zucchini, tomatoes, onions, and yellow squash always reached a point where there was too much to eat fresh. That is when this casserole came out. You would chop up whatever vegetables you had, sauté them lightly in a skillet with butter and herbs, then pour them into a baking dish. The top was crushed saltine crackers tossed with melted butter, baked until crisp and golden. It was crunchy, steamy, and deeply comforting in that way only garden food can be. The vegetables were never the same from house to house or even week to week. Some people added cheese or cream of mushroom soup for a richer version. Others kept it simple and let the vegetables speak for themselves. What mattered was that nothing went to waste. This was the clean out the fridge dinner that ended up being a family favorite. It showed up in old spiral-bound church cookbooks and recipe boxes everywhere. Served with a glass of cold milk or a slice of watermelon, it was summer on a plate. Hominy with butter and salt was simple, but it got the job done. Made from dried corn kernels soaked in lye to remove the hulls, hominy was a staple in southern and rural households long before the convenience of canned corn. It had a chewy texture, a mild flavor, and when cooked right, it took on butter like a sponge. You would simmer it slow until tender, add a lump of butter, and a generous sprinkle of salt. That was it. No sugar, no sauce. Just the taste of corn, warm and rich and earthy. Some folks added cream, others browned it in a skillet. but most just ate it straight, hot from the pot. It was usually served as a side dish, often next to beans or pork. Children grew up with it. Grandparents passed it down. And it fed families through more tight months than anyone could count. Today, you barely hear the word hominy unless you are talking about grits or reading an old cookbook. But once upon a time, it was right there on the plate, doing more with less. Wild mushroom ragu is a rich and savory dish that really shows you just how much natural goodness there is in the forest. It draws on the fact that wild mushrooms were an incredibly abundant resource back then in the woodlands of North America. The preparation of this dish was something that reflected the knowledge of indigenous peoples as well, because it just showed how much they truly knew about the land they were living in. Their ability to forage ingredients that could work both as daily sustenance and a big feast was also something impressive. Long story short, these people were adaptable like nothing else. The mushrooms would be cleaned, chopped, and sliced, and wild herbs would be used to make ragu. It would add an aromatic and herbal layer to the dish that really helped when you would eventually get to the earthy mushroom flavor, combined with the chewy texture. All in all, for people who can't deny a good mushroom, this is a dish worth recreating in its entirety. Oven-baked drumsticks with paprika were one of the most approachable poultry dinners of the 1950s, offering flavor and affordability in every bite. Housewives coated chicken drumsticks with paprika and seasonings, then baked them until crisp on the outside and juicy inside. It was an easy recipe that delivered consistent results, even for busy families. Children loved picking up drumsticks with their hands, while adults appreciated that chicken was cheaper than beef or pork. The paprika provided a warm, smoky flavor that elevated a simple meal into something more memorable. Community cookbooks often listed baked chicken recipes as weeknight staples, and this version became a favorite for its balance of cost and taste. Drumsticks were often served with mashed potatoes or green beans, completing the kind of dinner that defined mid-century kitchens. Oven-baked drumsticks with paprika captured the essence of 1950s family cooking. Straightforward, budget-friendly, and deeply satisfying. Liverwurst sandwiches were bold. You knew it the moment someone unwrapped one across the table. That unmistakable scent, rich and meaty, mixed with sharp mustard or sliced onions, hit like a wave. The sandwich itself was unapologetically old school, usually served on rye or pumpernickel bread, often from a family who still shopped at the neighborhood butcher. Liverwurst was spreadable sausage, soft but full of iron and flavor, and it had no intention of going unnoticed. It was the sandwich your grandpa swore by, the one your parents either embraced or exiled. And for kids, it was a gamble, either a lunchroom legend or a quick trade for something with peanut butter. But for those who loved it, liverwurst was gold. It was hearty. It was grown up. It was tradition sliced thick and pressed between slices of something dark and sturdy. Liverwurst never begged for your approval. It knew it was not for everyone. Today, you hardly see it outside specialty stores and deli counters. But for a time, it was part of the rotation. Loved by few, remembered by all. Cold macaroni salad with peas and pickles was the backbone of every summer potluck and Sunday picnic. It started with elbow macaroni, cooked just past firm, then rinsed cold and tossed in a big bowl. In went the peas, frozen, canned, or fresh if you were lucky, and finely chopped pickles for crunch and tang. A generous scoop of mayonnaise pulled it all together, maybe with a little mustard or vinegar for bite. Some people added onions, others hard-boiled eggs. But the heart of it was always the same, creamy, tangy, and cool. It was meant to sit on a paper plate next to cold chicken and deviled eggs. It traveled well. It fed a crowd, and it could stretch whatever was in the fridge into a meal. Kids liked the color. Grown-ups liked the convenience. And it showed up every summer without fail. Today, we have pasta salads with sun-dried tomatoes and goat cheese. But back then, this was the gold standard. And for those who remember it, nothing quite hits the same as that first forkful of cold noodles, peas, and pickles under the hot sun. Parsley noodle pudding brought a delicate herbal note to the classic baked noodle dish. turning inexpensive staples into a fragrant supper centerpiece. Wide egg noodles were cooked until just tender, then mixed with milk, eggs, a little butter, and a generous handful of freshly chopped parsley before baking to a golden finish. The custard base held everything together while the parsley added color and a bright, garden-fresh taste that lifted the entire dish. This pudding was equally welcome as a vegetarian main course or as a side alongside roasted vegetables. Because the ingredients were inexpensive and easy to keep on hand, it fit perfectly into the thrifty mindset of 1960s households. Home cooks appreciated how it could be assembled in advance and baked just before serving, freeing time for family or guests. Children enjoyed the mild flavor and silky texture, while adults admired its simple elegance. Parsley noodle pudding remains a quiet reminder that with a little imagination, even the most modest pantry can produce a meal worth remembering. Which recipe do you wish Grandma had written down before it was too late? Share your memories in the comments, hit like and subscribe so we can keep honoring the kitchen wisdom that deserves to be remembered.